G'day, Stephen Travers here from Stephen Travers Art, and welcome to this live session. Bit of a different time, so I'm not sure who's going to be awake to hear it and to take part. But I hope there's a few of you at least to ask some questions, because in this session I want to be just answering any drawing questions you might have concerning any aspect of drawing. So the one person who's listening at this point, if you have a question, please type it into the chat, or if you think of one, type it into the chat for me, and I'll do my best to answer it. But I've got a couple of questions dummy questions that I've prepared in case there's no one asking a question, so I'm not just sitting here smiling at you. And the first one is a really general question. And so there has, hello there, Brazen. Do you have a question about drawing that you'd like to ask me? This is a chance to ask me any question about drawing, the sort of question. Hi there, Psalmist. Welcome. And I just sit there smiling. No, I don't think so. Oh, quite a few people have bumped in just now. So this is your opportunity to ask me a question about drawing. It can be something that's really quite specific for your drawing, or it could be a more general. I just realized I sliced my fingers doing some work in the kitchen the other day. And so that's a hassle of a place to have a bad cut. Shrimp B from Idaho. Hey, my daughter was working from home, but she was watching the Super Bowl on the side. She had a little screen set up next to her big work screen. So possibly you were watching it too. That's okay. Fortunately, I draw with the other hand, so it didn't affect my drawing. It's just meant there's some household and gardening things I can't do. So more time for drawing. Look on the bright side. So waiting to hear some questions from you people who are listening. But so a general question that I'm just going to ask and then answer is, what do you how can I get better at drawing? What do you suggest as a way for me to improve my drawing? I don't have any particular understanding of perhaps what I'm doing wrong, but I just want to improve, and I know I'm not improving. What can I do? And I think if this is you, a really helpful thing to do is actually just stop drawing for a minute and grab all your drawings, have a look at them, and stretch back over as long as you've been drawing so you can see how you have progressed or not. And simply work out, what am I doing? Have a sheet of paper and jot down things like, on the paper, how often do I draw? How long do I draw for? How do I draw? What do I draw with? Is every drawing looking the same, or does every drawing look like someone different has drawn it? Do I sometimes do quick 5-minute sketches, and sometimes I do 2-hour drawings, and I do everything in between? Or do all my drawings tend to be 2 hours? Are all my drawings nice little puppy dogs? Or are they all World War II battleships? Whatever. Just do I have an obvious weak spot in one of in this sort of thing I draw? So if I draw, like myself, streetscapes, are my trees a bad weakness, or is something like perspective my weakness, or is when I have to draw people my weakness, or I don't draw any people and then my streets look weird? So all of these things, and work out, what is it? What is my starting point? Because it's very hard to know how to change if we don't know where we're changing from. And I don't think it's particularly helpful simply to want to change, because truth is, we should always want to change. We should always want to improve. So that in itself doesn't give me direction. So try and work out where you're at now, and and one of the best ways is to really spend some time trying to understand what you're doing and how you're doing it, because how we draw isn't just what happens when the pen hits the paper or the pencil or the watercolor, whatever. It's much broader than that. It comes from how I think, how I understand what the drawing process is. It comes from what I'm wanting to produce in my mind. And I may or may not have actually thought that out. But if I haven't thought it out clearly and deliberately, if I haven't tried to visualize how my finished drawings will look, I still have a vague sense of something that I'm working towards. Or it may be, to do with my process. the way I organize my drawing. If I draw once every 6 weeks, it's going to be very, imagine learning a musical instrument and drawing one and having a practice once every 6 weeks. Well, you really wouldn't expect to progress, would you? Wise drawing demanding of any less skill, effort, and process than learning piano or learning French or something. Imagine trying to learn French and having a 3 hour session every 6, 7 weeks. So do a stock take of all of these issues and see if anything jumps out as an obvious place to start to make a change, an obvious way of doing things that clearly isn't helpful to learn a skill. Okay, I'm just going to have a look now at some of the chat comments, and if you've come in, I do love to know where you're watching from. So let's have a look. Adamantium, I draw every day, partly because I enjoy it and partly because I'm trying to develop discipline. That's great. That's good. Drawing every day is a great way to do it. We can make more progress by doing a small amount every day than by doing large amounts of drawing infrequently. But just drawing every day won't necessarily improve me. I still have to be doing that everyday drawing with intent and focus. Mere repetition can actually entrench me in what I'm doing. And if what I'm doing is not particularly helpful, then I can really be reinforcing bad habits every day. So it's not that the doing it every day is helpful, but if I'm doing it every day and my thinking, my thought processes and my habits are helpful, towards improvement, then that is a great way to do it. And we don't need to draw for long to improve. And of course, we don't need to do a whole drawing to improve. We'll probably improve, like I mentioned before, maybe we do streetscapes and our trees a week. Well, if the trees are really the problem, then I'm going to have a larger, faster, positive impact on my drawings by just working on the trees, because I can do a small tree or a group of small trees in 5 minutes and do a worthwhile practice. And I could do 3 or 4 different drawings of different types of trees, going for different effects, maybe for some closer, some further away. And that will have a far faster improvement than drawing trees that aren't very good on large drawings that kind of spoil the larger drawings. I'm better off leaving the architecture part and working on the trees. And that will really accelerate that improvement. And maybe in just a month or so of concentrated effort with trees, now I can add them to my streetscapes, and the streetscapes don't get spoilt by the trees. Huge improvement in my art for not much time, and really not much effort in that it's not very long, but it's a lot of focus still. But it also means I can actually research and really work hard to work out, how can I improve my trees? Let me look at how other artists do trees, do foliage, do different types of trees, do trees at different sort of distances, and try and work out how they're thinking and assimilate that thinking. It's not copying their marks, it's understanding what guides them to make those marks to create these effects. So yeah, but that can be done quite well in short periods of drawing and of research. Um, Hey, yeah, Ian, welcome. Yep. I used to do. We've just had a huge rainstorm pass over Sydney, and but as it came across the country, around Harden, if you know where that is, Ian, in New South Wales. Someone, I think they quoted someone in the headline saying, the town looks like it's in Canada because there was so much ice over everything. So there you go. I'm sure it's not really anything like Canada in winter, but yeah. Salma's question: I used to do art 10 years ago and I'm way out of practice. I used to paint and draw. Realistically, how much time would it take to get to the level of proficiency to make a living from this? Well, there's kind of two questions here. There's how, like I don't know where you're starting from, so I don't know how far you have to go, and I don't know what sort of marketing you want to do. Like, do you want to basically be selling original fine art drawings, like gallery quality, and that's the path you're thinking you'll be making money from, or sticking things on mugs in an Etsy store and seeing if they sell. Like, it's kind of hard to know. And unfortunately, they're two totally different skill bases: producing art and marketing, making money from a product. And once we start creating art to sell, then we're actually creating a product. And then we have to market that product and do all the overhead that comes with, yes, and what's the word? Get someone else to do parts of it, and and there are apps that you can get, but everything takes a cut, and so you lose part of what you make if you don't do it yourself. But then there's only so much you can do yourself, so it becomes a real hassle. It's not an easy thing. And sorry, I'm just rearranging myself on the chair. I'm just kind of sitting on my leg. Um, I'm not really trying to give you a close-up view up my nostril. Sorry about that. Yeah, so look, it's a really difficult question to answer, but I would say, start small, and don't get taken in by people who make money out of trying to, well, I'm gonna say, use artists. Like, it there are lots of people who can make money from artists who are trying to make money, whether it's from printing our things, making prints or putting them on things, or from galleries where we have to pay to exhibit with no guarantee of selling anything. So you need to be really careful. So I would say start small, whatever you do. If you've got local markets, they're a great way just to test the waters. And while you're not going to be able to sell a drawing or a print or a card at a market for the same price as in a retail store or a gallery, it will, and so you shouldn't try, because you're just going to do your money for the market store. But if you price appropriately for a market, then you will get a sense of how people respond to your artwork, and that's a start. The other thing is, even just having an art Instagram account and posting your drawings can start to give you a sense of, is there enthusiasm for what I do? Do I get likes? It's as simple as that. Do I get comments? Or do I post 3 drawings a week and I get 2 likes, and one of them's from my wife, and I think one's from one of my children, and that's it. So these are ways, but I would say go slowly and keep improving your art, and avoid large outlay too early, because it can cost us a lot to try and sell our work. And if anyone listening in the chat has experience of this, then let us know, or perhaps a trap for someone trying to make money out of their art to avoid. Yeah, okay, great. Very cool. 60 years. If one is not really good at drawing and wants to get better quickest, do you think tracing, grid method, wedge clock, grid? Yeah, no. Next question. Yeah, look, I think the bottom line is, like, I'm not passing any judgment on any method of drawing. If you want to trace, that's great. If you want to copy someone else's drawings, go ahead. It's a free world. But if you want to learn to draw, then what you have to learn to do is develop the skills that you need to develop to be able to do what you want to be able to do at the end. If I want to become, a swimming freestyle swimmer, well, I can start with the backstroke, because I feel a little more comfortable maybe lying on my back with my eyes out of the water, but it's not really going to help me, except in very general ways. It's not really going to help me learn to do freestyle, because it's different. It's not better. It's not worse. It's different. And I think it's the same with drawing. If you want to trace, great, but you won't learn how to draw not tracing. So if you want to be able to draw freehand, that doesn't help you. If you look at my Instagram account, which I was doing before I was doing YouTube, all those big, do I have one here? Do I have one that I can grab easily without? No, I can't. I think they're all packed away. No, I don't. Oh, hang on. There'll be one. There'll be one in. Oh no, that folder's got nothing in it. I just want to show you what I mean. Okay. Look, I did lots of like large drawings such as this, and but and I did those with a grid, with a 4x4 grid on a photo on my paper, and then using pencil, I transferred it, and then I redrew it using that pencil underdrawing, and then I used a sketch marker. Now, it worked really well, and I made lots of nice drawings. And I mean, that sounds condescending, but they were nice drawings, and I've sold lots of them. Um, but it doesn't teach you the skills you need to do freehand drawing. And as much as I liked what I got from that, I reached a point where I was, well, a bit tired of doing that. I mean, they took 5 to 6 hours each. So I'd sit down and do them in one session. I'd have a break in between, usually. In between the pencil and the ink, I'd have a break, because probably 3 hours of 5 hours or 3.5 hours of 6 hours was actually on the pencil part. But yeah, I wanted to be able to sit in the street and draw. And unfortunately, just as I began to explore that, lockdown happened with COVID, and I didn't get to. But I kept practicing drawing freehand. And so if that's because that's how I wanted to learn, so that the trip to Europe that we had booked, that was then cancelled, that I could have sat in the streets and drawn freehand. And I knew I hadn't developed the skills to do that, doing these large, extravagant drawings as much as I like them. So start the way you want to finish. See, when you copy another artist's work, what you'll find is you'll produce better drawings more easily and more quickly than you can do by yourself. And what this does is it gives you a false impression of your drawing ability, because it is much easier to copy than to create original work. And the reason for that is that the difficult part is not drawing the lines on the paper or the marks. And when you copy someone, that's what you're doing. You're looking at a mark and you're copying it. You're reproducing that same mark or line, whatever, and trying to combine them all for the same effect. Now, there is some skill in that, and you will improve that skill if you keep practicing that. But the hard part when we go to draw is looking at my reference or in my imagination and trying to work out what lines, what marks, how to combine them to create the effect that I can vaguely see in my head, but now I need to have to make precise on my paper. I feel like I have artificial nails on my I have white nails. How to put those marks on my paper. And that's the hard part. The real work in drawing is working out before the ink hits the paper. And you don't get any practice at that when you copy the marks that someone else has done, because they've done all of that without you now having any access to that. You can only see the result, but you can't see how they got there, what thinking they did. So that's so important. That's the crucial thing. And the really unexpected thing I found is, as I've been having to really work hard to understand, because I mean, I don't have training in art. I'm self-taught. That's why I do a lot of, talking about the self-taught journey, because that's my journey. And so as I've evolved how I draw, I keep trying to analyze, what am I doing? Why am I doing it this way? What's happening? And what I found is, because I've been then making that and putting it into words to record, to video and to use, it's made me become probably a lot clearer, a lot more quickly, with understanding my process, and then continually modifying it, continually going deeper in some areas, or shifting my thoughts slightly in one area or another. And what I feel I've done is got to a point where I really strongly understand my drawing process. And that has had incredibly good impact in my drawing, I think, because the marks I make come from my understanding, and the greater clarity I have in my understanding of how I understand the process of drawing, and how I can translate my thinking of what I'm looking at into marks on the paper, or wash or whatever media I'm using, then the easier it becomes to actually put the marks on the paper. Not because I've practiced putting them on the paper more, but because I'm understanding more what I'm trying to do and how to do it. And that's been huge. Yeah. So I hope I've sniped to the windowsills right now. Oh, of course, yes, it's winter in Canada now, isn't it? Because it's summer here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's why it was a bit unusual too, because we're in February. This should be our hot summer month, February, but we are having a wet summer and it's not so hot, which is great for bushfires. So that's good. Making money from art's always a bit hit and miss. Yeah, yeah. Adam, I'm out of Northern California. I enjoy pen and ink the most. I do charcoal as well as watercolor with pen and ink. Might be spreading myself a bit thin, maybe. Look, graphic, like they kind of all overlap, all the things you said. So it depends. If you're learning, if you're a beginner, then I think you're spreading yourself too thin. I would work on the drawing first, and maybe in pencil and charcoal at the same time. They kind of go hand in hand. Or with watercolor, if it depends if you're doing watercolor by itself or watercolor over the top of. I started doing the freehand ink also because I was wanting to switch to add watercolor, and I thought the watercolor would go nicely with because my painting experience was in oil. So as it turns out, I've had so much fun with just the pen and the line work, and I just keep finding new ways to explore it that I haven't got round to the watercolor. But I am this year again. It's going to be one of my goals to start to throw some watercolor onto my drawings. But I do think it's not something you can particularly do well just on drawings you've done, because I think how you draw with ink line does change if you know you're going to be putting watercolor over the top, because you will not just be adding color, but you will be adding, or you can be adding value. And so you don't need all that hatching if you're going to be able to have color of certain values. And by that, I mean colors of certain lightness or darkness. So, yeah. So it just depends where you're at. If you've been creating art for a reasonable length of time and you've reached a certain level of achievement, then those things can all sort of start to overlap and you start to get the wonderful mixed media stuff. But I wouldn't rush to mixed media if you're just starting. It's like, well, yeah, I can try and learn French and let me see, French and say Polish and maybe Vietnamese at the same time. I can, but oh gosh, it'd be easier just to concentrate on one. And then when I become quite comfortable in that, to move on to another one. So yeah, I think there's always a lot of benefit in comparing learning to draw to learning other skills when it comes to process. And for some reason, it seems harder to kind of map out in our mind a sensible process with drawing virtually compared to any other skill, where somehow it's easier to understand. Well, you start like this and then you do this and this and this, and you don't expect to do this until, where it's like with drawing, it's like we expect to be able to somehow do everything all at once, especially if someone's mentioned to us that they think we're very talented. And then we think, oh, well, it will be easy. It'll just happen naturally. Very few things in life happen naturally, is my experience. What size drawing is the best to focus on? Difficult for me to scale my drawings to larger format. Look, the easiest way to do it is to start smaller. I mean, most of the drawings I do at the moment are small. And so that took me 2 hours to do. So that's not very big. There's my hand, and my hands aren't very big. But there's a lot of lines in it. Or this is a size I do a lot as well. But then I'm very much aware that when I'm drawing, I'm almost always recording my drawing for a video. So that places limits, because I don't want to have to speed it up 25 times real time. So, but when you're starting, the easiest way to go, I think, is to start smallish. And I actually think this is a good size. It doesn't have to be that complex. I'm just looking for something that size that's a bit simpler. Um, okay, so here's a few. So this sort of thing, I think, is a good aiming point when we're learning to draw. It's not very big. This is half A4, so that's copy paper size. So half copy paper, and then something with a generous white border around it, I think works really well. And I think one of the biggest things that slows people down when they start to draw is they try and draw too complex a scene or too difficult a scene too early. And there are two ways that a subject becomes very difficult. One is it's extremely simple. So, like, here's a, what is it? What do you call it? It's a wonder boom, but it's it's a sound thing. It's a relatively simple shape, and when you're drawing something relatively simple, then there's nowhere for mistakes to hide. And so, but these sort of things are very, very hard to draw well because you have to nail the silhouette. And then the other thing is something that's really complex, that has a lot of detail. And then there's all the in-between stuff. So go for the in-between stuff. But whether it's like simple or how simple, yeah. And you can know when you've done a few, because if you've done them well, then it's an appropriate level. If you can look at your drawing as a beginner and think, oh, Scott, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, then you certainly don't want to be going harder, more difficult, more complex than that. Because one of the worst things we do is we do drawing after drawing that continuously has the same problem, because then we start to not be able to, we get used to seeing those problems. We get used to the perspective being parallel instead of fan shaped and all these things. And we lose the ability to discern the problems that we have. But sadly, other people haven't lost the ability to discern the problems in our drawing. So, that's the problem. So when we start, we want to go slowly and really kind of nail what we're doing, because that's a better achievement, and that gives us then a foundation to move on to more complex things. So it all depends on what you want to draw, how much detail there is. But whatever it is, start with simple subjects and really be confident that you've done a good job. And if you've got a friend who's not afraid of telling you the truth, ask them. They don't need to be able to explain why something looks good or not good, but they can sense whether it looks accurate, whether it looks realistic. It depends what your aim for your drawing is and the style that you're drawing. But don't be afraid to co-opt a friend, because it can be hard to see things ourselves. And by personality, some of us may be very hard on ourselves and overly critical, and others of us may be very lenient on ourselves and be excusing things that we actually need to correct before we move on. So, yeah. And the other thing is, when we're starting, draw for a smaller length of time rather than a larger length of time. I talk about learning cycles, and I think 20 to 30 minutes is probably a good time to be completing a drawing in one session. And always, if you're beginning, do your drawing in one session. I've just done a video actually on why you should finish your drawings in one session. So I don't want to go into all that now. I think that was almost the last video I did. So if you haven't seen that and this is an issue for you, then go and have a look at that one, because I think there's a lot of ways we kind of make things harder for ourselves to learn, almost impossible. Like, there are all these things we only learn in the second half of the drawing, but they flow from the first half. And some of them it's impossible to learn in the second half if we're not doing it in a continuous line. Because when we draw, there is a rhythm in our drawing. There is a tempo of speed that picks up. but we lose all of that momentum, that tempo momentum, if we stop for a week or even just overnight. But the longer the period, the worse it is. And I think that tempo is a huge part of how the drawing feels, and particularly if you feel that your line work looks stiff and wooden and artificial and dead, and you want to have a more lively, energetic feel in your line work. I think, yeah, that is going to be really hard to do if you do the second half disconnected from the first, because the second half is when our line work picks up speed, and speed in doing it, not carelessness, but intentional, but speed with control. Um, we inject the energy of the movements that we make into our marks, which I think is really, which I think is important. Yeah, and you can't just resurrect the confidence that you developed in the first half of the drawing, 2 weeks later. It doesn't work that way. So, and remember, the marks that we see at the end, like when I finish the drawing and someone looks at this, let's say this took me 30 minutes, most of the ink that people are going to see was actually put on the paper in the last 15 minutes, not the first 15 minutes. Because in the first 15 minutes, there's a lot of just trying to work out proportions and everything and be careful with all of that and little marks to indicate. And you're going really slowly because we have to be accurate when we draw freehand with ink. But really, even if we're drawing with pencil, we still should be aiming to draw without erasing 2 out of 3 lines that we put on the paper. So whatever we draw with, we should be really intentional for accuracy. But that plotting and that visualizing things that we haven't drawn yet, that takes time. And that means we're going more slowly. But the more we draw, the easier it becomes to draw the other things, and hand-eye coordination picks up, and just our confidence picks up. And therefore, we put more ink on the paper, much more ink on the paper in the second half. And if we've got a nice kind of rhythm that's been picking up momentum and energy, then that shows itself in most of the marks that people see afterwards. I don't know. I've never heard this talked about by anyone else, but I'm so convinced it's so important. And I got to say, it's the second half of the drawing coming straight after the first half, where all the fun is. And it's what I remember. I don't remember the nerves and the trying to get things right. And is this angle right? And is this the right width for that? And will this fit on the paper? And all of this, the struggle sometimes to get that plotted and worked out on the paper. I don't remember that. I remember the fun part that comes in the last half I've done, where I'm now drawing quite fast and freely and with energy and enthusiasm and confidence and satisfaction. That's what I remember. Okay. I just have to go back. I better answer these questions quicker, hadn't I? Excellent. Struggle with something. I direct my energy directly to that problem. Tough time with cross-hatching. I'm trying to do in the pic. Yep. I've done a fair few videos on cross-hatching lately, Adam. So yeah. If you haven't seen them, I think really helpful one. There's on this 10 ways to use cross hatching. I used to wonder about like I would often get asked, what's the right way to cross hatch? And I've realized that that's the wrong question. The question to ask is, what am I wanting to achieve by my cross hatching? See, it's not a technique that can just be put on anything. It all comes down to process, to understanding, what am I trying to do? What finished drawing do I want to create? And what effects do I need to create to get that finished drawing? And if I come down this way of thinking, observing, understanding, translating into marks, then that gives me the direction I need to know how I'm going to crosshatch. What do I want to be happening? Do I want to be showing the form, the surface, three-dimensionality of the object? Am I trying to make it look darker or lighter? Am I wanting to create a certain effect, the effect of grass or of leaves, or of, I don't know, little sticks and stones and dead leaves and gravel on the ground, because all of these things, what are the light effects? Do I want to show bright sunlight? These are all the things that will tell me how to hatch, because there's not one way to hatch. But the question should be, what effect am I trying to create? What purpose in my drawing is hatching going to achieve for me? And then I can see what to do. So if you haven't seen that video, 10 ways to use cross hatching, it's not that many videos ago. So I really, really recommend that. Yep. Braze and Adam are suggesting is that you just work on your weak spots before incorporating that, in a bigger piece. Yep. All very good. Steve and I have seen several YouTubes on drawing recently where people are asking versions of my question. It seems to me you mostly do drop line method. Look, I don't know what you mean by drop line method. I could guess, but hopefully you're still listening. So can you just let me know, just with another comment? That would be great. Yes, Ian, plein air, or I just call it location sketching because I never know if I'm saying French words correctly. Speaking of Canada, have you heard of Tim Packer and his system for whatever is hot? No, look, I haven't heard. But look, I really would say don't try and engage with a package or a program, because, and I've got no idea about the one that you've mentioned there, no idea at all. And and yeah, but yeah, Ian's saying that the guy's paintings are good, but he doesn't know much about his art school. But whenever anyone is trying to make money out of me, then I have to assume that their main purpose is to make money out of me, and that's higher up perhaps than helping me make money. Yeah, and it's easy for people to make money out of me and my art, and for me to make no money at all. That's my experience. So, not that it's happened, but I've had to be cautious. I've learned to pay other people to help me make money, whether it's by printing things or whatever, very cautiously, because it's really easy, and it's so discouraging if we end up losing money on our art. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're not a good artist. It just means we're not very good at perhaps the art business and or marketing in general. Different skills. Brazen, have you said what drop line is? No, I haven't. You haven't yet. Okay. Another question. What's more important, being realistic in your art, which everyone does, some could argue, or finding your own unique style, or is it the wrong question? No, it's not. It's not the wrong question. Look, how we want to draw is totally up to us. What I would recommend is if you're at the beginner stage of drawing, and let me just, I'm just going to, I should have done this before I started. I'm just going to wipe the camera. No, I still look old and wrinkly. The one thing I think is important when we start to draw is to start trying to capture realism in our work. Now, I don't necessarily mean, I don't mean photorealism, but it's only if we're trying to capture something with a strong sense of reality that's in our reference that we can judge how we've gone, that we can see how successful we've been in developing our skills. Otherwise, I'm just drawing almost randomly. So I remember being surprised when I discovered that all the impressionists and all these, expressionists and stuff, they all started, if you like, with traditional art and often traditional art training. And from that, they were able to change stylistically. They were able to change their understanding of art for them and the art they were producing and the purpose they had for it. But they developed their skills and their initial framework, which then they were able to develop from a realism base. And, I mean, you might be lucky and throw things randomly on paper and it looks nice. People like it, but it's probably more good fortune than anything else. If we don't have kind of a base of, and even just learning how to use our materials, how to use our paint, how to do colors and value and blends or contrasts and just layer in whatever the issues of the materials we use are. It's very hard to do that if we can't sort of check what we were trying to do from our original reference. As I said, it doesn't mean we can't change our reference, but at the start, I would suggest that you try and do as realistic a copy of what you're drawing from. Not doing a copy, we can't. I can't copy something that's photographic with a fine line of black pen, but I'm trying to create the feel of realism, and I can certainly check things such as proportions and have I got a sense of the three-dimensionality of it, which, mind you, a photo won't have. So photos are two-dimensional. They flatten physically the photo is two-dimensional, but the photographic process flattens distance. It collapses. Gonna sneeze. Excuse me. It flattens all the depths of plane, and just wipe my elbow. It flattens all the depths of plane together, and so we lose that sense of depth. Now I can put that back into my drawing, what the camera has taken away. So we're not wanting to copy a photo. We're wanting to use it as our base and then springboard off that to actually create something that as a drawing works better than a copy of the photo. Yeah. Thanks. I just saw a video that came up in my recommendations about it and it seemed legit, but I don't know the art. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Thanks, Nancy. I've gleaned a lot of knowledge about watercolor painting from YouTube with hardly lifting a brush. Similarly, my drawing has improved a lot without sketching hundreds of hours. Hands and nose are worse. Yeah. But I'm testing my drawing skills with draw alongs that I can keep simple and fun. If I start a drawing to work on a technique, I may quit halfway so I can work on another technique. Not erasing every squiggly line. Yeah, well, brazen draw with pen, draw with ink, and you can't erase. And then we learn the skills of either hiding or incorporating, or at least learning to not get uptight about lines and marks that aren't in the right place. Yeah, because we have to. I'm far more relaxed when I put a line that's not quite right now, because I've learned that in most cases, you really can't notice them at the end. They always look worse when you just do them. So, and often they're early lines because we don't have as much or anything to reference them from. And so there's so much blank paper, those marks, that ink in the wrong place, just, but at the end, when there's so much ink everywhere, not nearly as obvious, if at all. So that's an important thing too. Look, I think the problem, Brazen, with draw along, now, it partly depends what you mean by that. But if it's like with my videos where I do a demo, regardless of the speed of the demo, whether it's real time or whether it's 3 or 4 times actual drawing speed, I don't recommend that you try and draw at the same time as my drawing, because if you do, invariably you're going to be watching the end of my pen on the paper. You're not going to be looking at the reference at all. The way I think you will learn most from me, and the reason why I put the reference there, is so that you can see, and I can explain in part, but not for everything, but for where I don't have time to put words to it, you can see what I'm looking at and perhaps come to be understanding how I'm translating in my head what I see in the photo to the marks that I choose to put on the paper. And if you can understand my thinking, my translation process, then you can translate anything. You can translate things I've never drawn, because what you've done is you've now made my thinking process, my translation process, yours. And it is yours. It's not a copy of mine, because it's never going to be the same as mine, because your brain's different to my brain. But you're taking the best or the most relevant of my thinking, and you're now making it your thinking, because when you use that thinking to put the marks on the paper, you've made it your own. But if you're just copying my marks, drawing along as I draw along, then you're just copying my marks. So, but the problem is, we get, as I said before, we get better results faster and more easily if we draw what someone else is drawing without any understanding, because it is easier to copy than to produce original drawing. Um, as I said, it's not a judgment. That's fine if I'm happy to copy. But if I want to learn to be able to draw things myself, it's a dead end. It's a branch off the track into a different direction that will not take me, because I will not learn the skills that I need to learn. And I've talked with people who've got quite discouraged because they thought they were quite good, because when they copied other drawings, they look good. But then they got really discouraged, thinking I can't really do it, because when I draw myself, it looks so much worse. And it's just that they haven't developed the skills they need to create their own drawing rather than copy someone else's. And it's not technical skills of controlling the marks on the paper. It's the understanding to know what marks to try and put on the paper and how to combine them. That's the hard part of drawing. That's the part that, if we come to understand that, every drawing of every subject becomes the same, becomes, if you like, as easy or as hard as every other subject. I keep thinking I should try and do a portrait sometime and apply the techniques and the skills and to put my understanding to a different subject. Now, doing a subject we don't normally draw will probably be challenging for all of us at any level. But that's not because of the actual drawing skills. It's just that I don't have the observational awareness, depth of the subject and the things I particularly need to focus on, and some of the solutions to translating, say, an eyeball onto paper. Now, if I do a number of portraits, I will learn by experience that. But it's not that a portrait really is any harder or easier than a bunch of flowers or a battleship, which I used to draw. I used to love drawing battleships with pencil when I was a teenager. Because in the end, it's all the process of understanding and translating onto paper. So, yeah. Dropline method is like using your pencil to assist you in placing a banner. Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, and if you watch my videos, you see that I'll often, on the reference, I'll put the pen at the angle and slide across. Now, what I do is I mostly do that to check a mark I've already put. So because I want to develop my ability to eyeball it, so that when I'm sitting in the street and I'm just looking at the building, I can see the angle, and I can work out what angle on the paper will be the same angle. So what I usually do is I look at the reference, I eyeball it on the paper, and I put a dot where I think the end of the line will be from whatever starting point I've got. And then I now get the measurement between the starting point and my dot before I draw the line, and I slide across to check. And that tells me how my estimations are going. That tells me, am I seeing this and being able to jump from there to here accurately? And that's really helpful to know. And it also tells me, do I consistently make the line too steep or too shallow? Because that's really helpful to know as well. And if there's any doubt, it's really helpful after our drawing to actually tape the reference and our drawing side by side and to slide a ruler along at the angle. It doesn't matter if we've changed the scale, the angle stays the same. We can double the size. in our drawing, but the angle will stay the same. And it lets us see, have I got it right? Because obviously getting the perspective right, if we're trying to capture realism, is really important as a skill to do. So yeah, so that's how I do it. And it's not just perspective angles, it's any angle. It's a roof line angle. Anything that has a diagonal line, do the same thing. And when I'm drawing on location, I actually do the same thing. In some ways, it's easier on location, I think, because you shut one eye and you hold the pen against the line in the building or the line along the facades, and then you just bring it straight down onto the paper, just in like a movement, just like this, yeah. And it's surprisingly accurate. I mean, it looks really bodgy, doesn't it? But I'm amazed how accurate it is. So, okay, let's look at these questions. Pen is scary. That, yeah, it is scary. If we're perfectionistic. I've actually got a video in the making at the moment of, well, it's a series of bullet points that I thought of as I was going to bed last night that I jotted down on a sheet of paper, but it's how to break out of perfectionism in our drawing, and which largely comes from my own experience of how I managed to break out of it. But one of the big ways is to bite the bullet and to just draw with a pen, because it is scary if we're overly needy for everything to be perfect. And yeah, I found it has been incredibly helpful just to help me get over it. It's not the only thing I've done, and it's not the only thing that we can do, but because when I can't erase a line, I kind of like suck all the oxygen out of the room, and the perfectionism can't breathe, because it depends, like, for the perfectionism to live, it has to be able to change what happens, and it can't. So I now focus on, if something's not quite right, how can I make it look better? But not necessarily straight away, but by the time I finish my drawing. And one of the things we learn, and again, not if we don't ever get to the second half of the drawing, if we always, give up halfway through, or just get tired of it because it's too big and we haven't got time and we get exhausted or whatever, and then we start something else because that's always more exciting, then I never learn that in the second half of the drawing, I can overcome, usually, much of the impact or all of the impact of the line that's not, or the marks that aren't in the right place. So again, so many important skills we learn in the second half of the drawing that we cannot learn in the first half, and that is so important. These are the things that we see. It's the second half marks that make up the bulk of the ink that we see at the end. And it's also the fun part, because everything starts to come together. But pen is scary, though. Brazen Hope, draw alongs are a silly thing, mostly on Twitch more than YouTube. But Link Inktober challenges you have certain prompt words and then create anything you want, and the streamer is doing their concept. Yeah, look, there are different ways, and there are fun things we can do, and there are yeah. But in terms of it's what is my normal drawing practice? I mean, I remember when I first thought, I wonder if I could make drawing videos or make videos. I was probably just thinking, make art videos for YouTube. I wonder, like, I only ever looked at one thing for drawing for videos on YouTube. That was how to draw a full Windsor knot. The ties, the proper way of doing a tie, not the schoolboy half knot that I always did. But that was the only thing I ever looked up on YouTube, how to draw a full Windsor knot. And I only needed it for funerals and weddings. And there weren't enough of those that I would remember in between. So every time I had a funeral or a wedding, I'd be using YouTube. But I was thinking, I wonder if I could do some YouTube drawing videos. And I Googled how to draw. And the first thing that came up was how to draw an ice cream. And I thought, what? And I tapped on that. And of course, it was this, look, I got to say, brilliant video of a father and daughter. And I don't know, she's about 8 maybe, and he draws and she draws along with her next to him, and it was this cutesy, it was so simple. I mean, it would take you all of about 15 seconds to do. just a dome and a little bit of melty bit and some eyes and a mouth and a cone. And like it had 35 million views or something. I don't know. It was crazy. And I thought, oh, okay. It's not what I thought. Yeah, and look, great activity for parents or anyone and kids. Yeah, whatever. It just depends what we want to do, and we can have fun, And when I draw with my granddaughter, I'm not trying to do an artwork or make a video. It just depends on our purpose and what we're wanting to achieve. But if I'm wanting to develop drawing skills so that I can produce original drawings and maybe even, who knows, sell some or make some money, a bit of a side hustle one day, then there are certainly better ways to navigate that process and to get that direction and to end up at that end place in as timely a manner that I can do as possible, which won't be the same as everyone else. And let me remind you, on our very first day of deciding we're going to learn to draw, we don't all start at the same place. It's got nothing to do with talent. But some of us, by good fortune, will have happened to have developed more skills that are useful in drawing than others. Not because we're trying to, or because we're more noble or more clever, but just because we happen to, for whatever reason. We've learned to observe more carefully because we've had to do it for something in our job. We've learned to maybe translate. Maybe we have been we've learned other languages and we've learned to translate, and we kind of intuitively feel that process of converting one thing into a different thing and conveying the meaning, but in a different way, which is a tremendously helpful way of thinking of the drawing process, I think. So all of that, yeah, all of that. Hey, hello there, Smither. We put the time at like half an hour is scary, but okay, right, yeah. I got to admit, like my social media time is so large already. It's a bit hard for me to do anything that requires any more of, how your phone tells you how long you've been on it. My phone tells me I've been on it for 8 hours most days. I mean, that can't be right, can it? I think color along leads to draw alongs doesn't work this. Not sure what you're saying there with alongs. I think color alone led to draw. Does Stephen have a video on how to use oils? No, I don't. Because when I began to make the drawing videos for YouTube, I thought temporarily stop doing oil painting. And yeah, it's a complicated story, but I thought it was only going to be for like 6 months or so. And it's been like 5 or 6 years now. And it's partly because the drawing's taken over my life now. And now some other things have happened and I don't have my studio space again. Yeah, adult children have a lot of stuff. Or they can that they want to store with mum and dad. But I have actually thought I would like to, and because my oils are all packed away, but I have thought I'd like to get them out and to see how all of my drawing now would inform my oil painting. Yeah. I mean, you've probably seen some of my oil stuff, but there's a big tree, big gum tree that I've done. So that's like, I don't know, that's over 5 foot, I think. So I think there's a couple of things on the other side of the room. So that's the sort of thing I was doing, fairly naturalistic. But I'm actually thinking, gosh, how would I paint in oils now, having done all this kind of graphic work, all this drawing, and maybe almost drawing with color, with oil, as opposed to watercolor, which is perhaps seen as the more common or the more natural medium to associate with line work. So yeah, I kind of hope I'll actually do that at some stage. The trouble, it's always easier just to do it, 30-minute drawing though than to get the paint out and set up for that. But you know, would that be interesting to see? I think it would be. I don't know whether it's a video or not. And the great thing, Brazen, about the dot is that if it's like really not right, then I just do a dot at the correct point, and often that dot that's in the wrong part is hidden by something. But if it's like too high and it's at the top of our subject, and so it's sort of in space, you don't notice it. You just don't notice it at the end. And, you know, I do little marks all over the place, and they almost all get hidden. And the ones that don't just become part of the kind of static of marks that kind of add a little bit of bounce to the whole scene, visual bounce. Who doesn't like a bit of visual bounce, eh? Pencil is scarier for me because of perfectionism. I'd never complete a drawing with eternal redoing. Good on you. Good on you, Smitha, for saying it, for putting it into words. It's really good to understand how we are. One of the good things about getting better in life, and not better, getting older in life, is that we get perhaps better at understanding who we are. And I don't mean that we put up with being unpleasant or unkind or whatever, but knowing where you're at is always a great starting point for where you want to get to. And yeah. So being able to be honest about things that impact our drawing is great for our drawing, because if our drawing in the end and our drawing improvement is driven by what happens in here first, even ahead of what we see, but driven in here of how we think, then thinking is going to be, you know, so crucial to what we end up putting on the paper. Always had the knack, but never invested much time. G'day there, German, and but Andre. Now just turning 40, I reached some goals and find myself with some time to devote to drawing, starting directly in ink due to its no backsies nature. Yes, good on you. Absolutely. You know, I used to get so frustrated with the last pencil drawings I did, because I'd gotten good enough. I'd become good enough at drawing that I now had high standards, but I also had higher expectations, and I was and I could perceive things being not perfect better, which meant, ironically, that the better I became, the more I was erasing. Does that resonate with anyone? And so instead of the drawing becoming easier, it was becoming more of a burden and more of a chore. And I thought, oh, this is no good. I've got to sort of shortcut this. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. So good on you. Yeah. Just push ahead and get to the end and learn what we learn and then start again. Absolutely. Look, the other thing that feeds perfectionism is thinking that our drawings are artworks, instead of thinking that everything I do is I'm learning to draw. I mean, I still think that. I still think that when I pick up a pen and paper, I'm learning to draw, because I am. Because I look back at my drawings, and I can see a continuous development of how I draw, and most of the time of getting closer to what I'm visualizing in my head. And so, you know, I could probably sell some of my drawings, but I'm still thinking of them as they're all drawings. I'm not thinking of them as artworks. And I think if we do that, we will actually start to create artworks without realizing it and without the pressure. So what we don't want to be doing is trying to be selling things or marketing things too early, because then we have the pressure. Then we get this focus back to it has to be an artwork, rather than I'm learning to draw, and it's a skill. And no one learns a skill to a marketable level, or very few people learn a skill to a marketable level quickly. And if this is extra to an already busy life, I'm working, I've maybe got family or commitments, whatever, then there's only so much time we can devote to it. So yeah, you're new. Well, welcome, Samus. I'm delighted to have you to my channel, and I've got about 1,200 videos, I think. So please scroll back. What I would suggest is that you look at my playlists, because that will help you kind of work out the sorts of videos that you feel like would be of most benefit to you. And that's part of the reason I put them into playlists. I probably would draw impressionistic in oil by now. Yeah, I'm kind of thinking I would, but not in even in that impressionist way. I'm thinking more of a almost starting to look a bit unfinished, a bit deconstructed, because yeah, leave it at that, because I haven't thought enough to, but yeah. I don't know whether I'll be so bold to have the canvas showing bare in parts. I know that when I was doing all these big paintings and that, my kids would come in and almost like I'd be just doing the underpainting, and I would grid the photo, I'd grid the canvas, and just with some burnt sienna or something, I'd just, do a bit of an outline of where things were and that. But when I'd basically done the underpainting, the kids would all come in and say, it looks much better now, Dad, than when you finish it. Like it's all full of energy now, and you make it look more perfect, but it looks more alive. So I think, but there was something in me that made me, I have to get it like finished for it to be proper. Well, I think I'm over that now. So I think I hope to have fun at some stage in the future with oils to explore some other possibilities of how it can look, by applying it differently to how I've applied it. Andrea, what kind of paper to use for drawing in the US anyhow? I suggest big creative paint. Well, since you've asked that, let me show you what I use. I use this Art Tech. It's an Australian brand, so you probably can't get it most parts of the world. There you go. Isn't that helpful? They're based in Melbourne. They're made in Melbourne. They're made from German. It's made from German paper, and it's 210. It's 210. I've been saying it's 190 GSM in comments I make to questions. Oh, I'll remember that. 210 GSM drawing cartridge, and it does take wet medium, but it doesn't really have enough tooth for watercolor. The pigment kind of all drifts around and ends up all sitting at the end of where the water is, rather than kind of being caught by the tooth in a more even way. So I wouldn't recommend it for watercolor, but you can use it for wet work as well. And it has, but it's not super smooth either. So it's great for charcoal and stuff, I think, and graphite. And you can buy it in different sizes. So I've got some, but it's cheaper to buy A3 and to either cut them in half or cut them into 4 than it is to buy a pre-cut one. So I usually slice these up. So that's what I use. But again, in the end, the best paper to use is paper that you can easily afford and easily get, because there's nothing will inhibit your drawing development as much as being scared of wasting the materials. So if you've got art supplies that were so expensive that you're afraid of wasting them, they are terrible art supplies for you. Just use them or throw them away or get rid of them, and just use what you can use freely without the inhibition of price or running out. Okay, that's my advice. And it's not just paper, it's everything. Don't buy paints that you're afraid to use because they're too expensive. Don't buy pens. You're better off drawing, when you start to draw, you're better off drawing with a biro if you're too worried about wasting ink. Like, seriously. Yes, there are things we can do with this that perhaps would be a bit of a struggle to do with this, but they're not things that are going to affect the learning improvement for a long time at the start. You will learn far more by picking this up at every opportunity and putting ink on paper, even if that paper is just copy paper. Yes, there are advantages in heavier paper and different textures, but again, you will learn far more by putting this on this at every opportunity than by putting this on that occasionally. Okay. Adam studies Robert Crumb's hatching. Great. Very good. I'll have to look them up. start to call you Spencer. Oh, I don't think so. I do love what's not to love about Van Gogh, eh? I think it is healthy to think something we draw as an artwork and training. Some of the artwork is good, most of us not, because we are constantly doing. Yeah, look, I mean, I just think it gets in the way when we're learning. Like, yes, there is some point, I think, where it is helpful to start thinking, now I am wanting to produce artworks, as opposed to I'm wanting to be practicing and improving on my mistakes. But I see a bigger problem with people and their drawing, that from the start there's this pressure or expectation or thought that what they're producing is an artwork, is somehow a proper drawing, when it's so full of mistakes. It's clearly done by someone who's just starting to learn to draw. Um, yeah, I mean, some people are overly confident, overly enthusiastic, perhaps don't know enough about art or about drawing to be able to assess what they're doing accurately, and so they easily impress themselves. And maybe I'm just an old man going on, but it does seem that that's a little more common these days with younger people. With people who are a bit older, it can easily be the opposite as well. That, like, oh, well, if I did it, it can't be any good at all. I'm hopeless. How could I possibly do an artwork? In which case it is, at some point we really need to work on that as well. And it's the difficulty of saying anything about anything, is that it just depends who you're talking to, and I don't know who I'm talking to. But it's great to get the comments in the chat, and that helps me to see the range of people who are engaging with me. Welcome, Samus. Yep. I do not just sit here, blah, blah, blah. You said that 30 times, isn't it? Yeah. Well, look, yeah. And look, I try and do a lot of variety and a range of different things too. And that's partly for my own interests. But, I know there are people who never watch my blah, blah, blah videos. I call them my face to camera ones, where I go down in the backyard and just keep turning the camera different ways so it looks a bit different, so it's a new point. But I actually think they're my most important videos. I actually think they're the ones that that potentially will transform your drawing process hugely, way more than watching me draw, even with the voiceover. Just my person, but I know that most people won't believe that, and that those videos have a smaller audience. But I think if I could map the people who watch those and their drawing progress versus the people who watch the videos that are just actual demos, I think you'd find that the ones who get the framework of understanding that guides, directs, shows me what marks to do, that they're actually improving faster. But we will never know. Brazen, I completely agree with this advice. Use what you have. And yep, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I worked in secondhand stuff for a while in my varied working life, and it was always sad when we'd get things. Someone had obviously died, and here were all the things that were kept for special for 30, 40, 50 years and were never used, and now they've died. Special never came, and now someone's just dumped it into a donation bin. So yep, life's too short to not use things, but we're still better off, if we're learning, to buy things that we can use without recourse, without being tense or worried, because being tense and worried when we draw is not a helpful way to learn. So yeah. And look, at the start, it makes precious little difference, for 95% of everything. When you get really experienced with oil paints, then good pigments do. You can start to you have a level of skill where you can use the advantage that expensive pigments bring. But at the start, there's so much to learn. That's not going to be a discernible thing. So buy the stuff you can squeeze out and experiment with mixing and all of that. I burn in throw copy paper €1 for my basic training of fundamental using cheap pen and pencils. Yeah, great. Absolutely. Yep. So whatever you can use without thought is great, and there'll be tremendous benefit there. Andre, I got some pads of good paper and the mentioned pile of copier paper. Only question I might have is pen and ink are wet or dry. Yeah, I think of it as a dry medium if it's ink coming out of the end of a pen, and I think of it as wet if I'm applying it with a brush. So yeah, but in the end, yeah, they're just words. Experiment. It's what works for you and what you want to do and how you want your drawings to look at the end. I mean, I've found these are that paper is really good for the Copic sketch markers when I do apply sort of ink over it, which people often think is an ink wash, but it's actually, these things. It's always the brush end I use, because I find you can get more kind of flexibility there. But yeah, that surface, that 210 GSM drawing cartridge is really good for that sort of ink. Definitely take a stance of humility and get some quality feedback. Yeah, but listen, don't underestimate your ability to give yourself feedback, because you are always available immediately to give feedback. And if I'm doing an art course, I have a teacher who I'm paying by some means to give me feedback. But if I'm navigating if you're watching my videos, I'm not your teacher. I'm a resource that you've chosen to use. But you still control how you use this resource of my videos, and whether you use it at all or someone else's resource or no resources. So it's not the same. And of course, I can't give individual feedback in these videos to you. So you have to, when you're self-taught, you're the teacher as well as the student. So you have to mark your own work as a teacher marks their own work and decide whether it's a pass or a fail. And by that, I mean whether you need to stay in this place or whether you can move on to more advanced things. And or whether, in fact, you need to go back, whether you've gone ahead too far, and in fact, you actually need to go back and consolidate some skills that you were working on earlier because you've kind of lost touch with them. That I think can be an issue as well. And you have to get your red pen and not be afraid of putting F with a big circle around it. Equally, being prepared to put A+ with a circle around it too, and to sit back and feel satisfied that you've done well. But learning to mark our work, or critique it, is probably a better way of putting it, is a skill that we have to learn. It's not something that we're necessarily able to do well immediately. Because of prior experience, some of us may be able to, and you probably know, but maybe Psalmist, you wouldn't know that I was once a high school teacher, only for 3 years, 1980, 81, 82. Probably some of you, your parents weren't born when I was a high school teacher. But in that, I mean, it wasn't art, it was English history. But what we learned in teacher training was how we learn, and blah blah blah. So that was all prior knowledge for me when I began to paint and to draw, and I had all of that training to draw on that someone else starting to draw or paint on the same day as I had may not have had. And that's helped me navigate the whole understanding the drawing process and how we might learn to draw, and being able to apply it to me first. So this is what I mean when I say we don't all start in the same place on day one. Think of kids in kindergarten. A friend of mine was a primary teacher, and then she was put on a kindergarten class for the first time. And she said, Stephen, like on day one, I have all these kids and some of them can read and write, And some of them can't tie their shoelaces or hold a pen, pencil, crayon. And I'm expected to manage all of them at once. Like, we don't all start on day one. We don't all start at the same place. So we have to keep remembering that. We can look at what other people are doing for inspiration and ideas, but we shouldn't look at other people for comparison as to how good am I, because we're not comparing the same thing. Dude. You love my gardening. Yeah. Did you see yesterday's or day before? I was watching out for snakes, and then I got bitten by ants everywhere. G'day, Kathy from sunny South Africa. Yes, someone else who's in the Southern Hemisphere. Is there anyone else besides Kathy and myself in the Southern Hemisphere? Yeah, enjoying summer, although we've just had a horrendous thunderstorm. I think there's all flooding in the city and stuff in Sydney. We are a dry, cool winter and a hot, wet summer kind of climate here in Sydney. The latitude of Sydney is the same as Madrid, so there you go. Pass the law against myself to stop the negative self-talk. I'm not allowed chocolates if I say I suck. Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't suck. I'm learning. That's what I think. That's the helpful thing. I'm learning. And when I critique and I identify the things that aren't done right, I'm giving myself focus and direction for my next drawing. In fact, I should try and draw something that that requires me to do these same things again. But I've got more knowledge. It's not just this doesn't work, but how would I make it work? And so, as I was saying at the very start of this session, if I drew a streetscape and the tree at the side or in front or little shrubs or the garden, whatever, is not as good as the rest of the building, then I should spend a week every day doing a 15-minute drawing of a little garden bed or the tree at that size, at that scale, in the sort of technique that would work. Or I spend some of that time looking at how to draw trees. I have a tree drawing playlist, if you've not seen it, that has about 80, 90 videos on it, but it's trees, it's flowers, it's grass, it's plants, it's shrubs, it's strappy, like it's all things like that grow out of the ground are in that playlist. But yeah, and there's a range of things. There's videos on why tree drawing is so hard, because part of the problem is we've developed some very unhelpful habits with drawing trees, usually before we really admit to ourselves that we have a problem with drawing trees. And understanding where those habits have come from is helpful to releasing us from them, so that we can now start again with, as an adult, developing better ways of seeing the process of drawing a tree. Yep. I tell myself I love every mark I make on the paper. Well, I don't love every mark, but I forgive the ones that I can't love. I'm sorry, what were you saying about improving voiceover, map, and whatnots? I'm not sure. If someone who's been listening for a few minutes, if they can see what is us, I'll go for Ruby. What Ruby was saying. If they can relate that to the point I was making at the time, please let me know, and I'll try and say it again. Think of every drawing as a training exercise, but mainly because it's fun. Yeah, too many ideas I want to try. Yeah, and that's great. That's how. I mean, we always want it to be fun. I mean, no one has to draw. I mean, even if we do it as a job, well, I guess if we've done fine arts and graphic design and we do it for what am I doing? And we do it for a job, then yeah. But for most of us, we don't have to do it. And so we need to enjoy the process. So it's something that in some way should be making us feel good about ourselves, the world. Yeah. In my opinion, watercolor is the one medium where artist quality paints do make a big difference to how every stroke and wash lays down. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, I do have watercolors. I actually got the opportunity to buy all these really expensive watercolors, like top brands for $1 a tube, from a shop that had closed down, and all the leftover post-sale stock was in a garage, and they had to move interstate. And a friend of mine knew them and said, "Oh, they'll sell them." And I got all this stuff, and I bought so much. Um, and I've barely used any. I've given away, you know, probably 3/4 of it, but I've still got a huge amount. And yeah, look, it can make a difference. But again, um, if buying it means we're afraid to use it, then it's too expensive for us. Like even, but yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking I can probably see actually how the better pigments would make more of a difference in watercolor, because they're more exposed. The water is a thinner medium than the oil, and yeah, so it probably does make a bit more of a difference than with oils. Yeah, so I'll concede that one, Brazen. I'm so metacognitive. That's something I've never been told before. I must make a point of telling my children, I'm metacognitive, I've been told. I'll assume it's a compliment and I'll say thank you, Ruby. Brazen, I probably have a few thousand pictures I've taken as references for painting. So I'm almost 60, so it's time. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I've got a child going overseas tomorrow, and I've said, "Oh, mate, I've given a list of all the things I want them to take photos of for me, so that I can have some more photos to draw from." That yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm sick of looking through the same drawings, trying to find something I haven't drawn before, or crop it differently, or zoom in on something. Drawing trains the brain, the only thing that we can still exercise at our age. No, look, we need to exercise our body. We need to, as best we can, we need to keep ourselves, when we hit, 60. Well, I'm much closer to the next one, but it's important to keep ourselves moving. I mean, we use our body to draw. If I can't sit comfortably in a chair while I draw, that will affect my drawing. It really will. If my neck's sore, well, we can't really usually affect our eyes, but yeah, if I physically can't be comfortable, then that will, if I can't move my arms easily, that's going to affect my drawing. So there's a reason to stay as healthy as we can, with whatever limitations we have. Stephen went from being an English teacher to art teacher with way more. Yes. I got to say, most of my teachers didn't want to be in the same. Most of my students didn't want to be in the same room as me. And I said to my wife, I think it's ironic, because now there's probably, if I was teaching art, a lot of people who'd like to be in the same room as me. So life is a crazy roller coaster, isn't it? Brazen hearted drawing trains the brain. Yep. Whether with a fine liner or the Staedtler rapidograph, either at the begin or the end of traces, I get excess ink, not blotches or notable. Is there a way to start or finish traces? Look, I don't trace, so I don't know. It's one thing I've never done. I'm not sure what a rapidograph is. So I assume it's not a pencil. I assume it's some sort of ink thing. And exactly what happens with the ink onto the paper does depend on the mechanism. So it's different if I've got a fountain pen and I've got ink flowing down through that gap, that sort of cut. and there's a little round open bit for like a little reservoir. That creates a different dynamic to if I'm drawing as I do with what I think is basically a compressed fiber tip. So there's a fibrous kind of cylinder really compressed hard to give it strength, and the ink flows through that. Well, that creates a very different line to something such as this pen, which is actually like a biro. It's got a little ball at the end, and I love these Mitsubishi Uniball pens. The problem is because you get such a luscious flow of ink. Problem is it's a lot of ink coming out at once to control. And because when I get going, I actually draw quite quickly, I'm smudging it before it's dried, which doesn't happen at all with these. And I find that with my drawing style, I like the fact that with these, I can get a like a light line by drawing quickly, briskly, holding the pen at a low angle like this rather than like this. I can get like a underdrawing line almost with ink, and that's become part of my drawing process and part of my technique. And I can't get that with this. But if I was having to do, I often use these if I'm doing a drawing. I want to do just like a simple perspective box diagram or something, because I get a really nice clear black line. But it all depends on the mechanism for the ink flowing onto the paper. But it also depends on the speed and what I've learned that with whatever I use, so the ink flows through the pen onto the paper. The thing that really then determines, besides the mechanism and just I guess the ink type of ink, is how long it's in contact with the paper for. And so when we start a line, it's easy to kind of like put it in the spot before we start to draw the line and like hold it there. And oh, this is a 0.1 millimeter pen, so that's not good. But like even with this, I can see there's like a little round blob at the start. And if I go slowly, I'm going to get a thicker line because the end is contacting the paper longer, and therefore more ink can flow and soak into the paper in that longer time that it's there. But what usually happens when we draw, well, it depends on the length of the line, but is that we start slowly because we're building up speed. We go a bit faster, and then we're like the train coming into the station, we start to slow down. And what that means is we get a heavier line at the start, heavier line at the end, maybe a blob at each end, and a lighter, thinner line where we picked up speed before we put the brakes on. Now that's great if that's an effect we can use, visually to create some sort of visual effect that goes with what we're drawing. It actually enhances our drawing subject in some way. But it's not so good if it just happens because we haven't thought about it and we're not controlling it. And please, can you hit the like button for me if you're watching this and finding it helpful, because that is very helpful for me. And if you've come in partway through and you've only got like a few minutes, please find this and watch it while you're doing the dishes or doing some gardening or lying in bed trying to get to sleep. Yeah, and hear the other things that have been said. Yeah. So, but I think with tracing, just getting back, Andre, to what you're saying, and this is why I was saying all that, is that you are going fairly slowly because you want to have your line on top of the line that's underneath. And so you're going to be getting a stronger flow of ink. And I mean, again, it depends on the effect we want, but there's a lot to be said for developing the technique, to developing skill at the technique of actually starting our line, before we contact the paper and then lifting off so that we don't get that, and doing a steady, even pace, if so that we get the same thickness along the whole way. Yeah. One of the things I think enhances the vitality of our line work is different speeds. And so I think it's great to have a range of speed draws that we do in different parts. And often the focal point of our drawing, I'll draw with more intent with slower lines and get a heavier, more consistent line. And then as we go out to the periphery, quicker, faster, lighter, more gestural lines, which I think just works well with the sense of we're not seeing that as clearly. Because in life, when I look at something, if I don't turn my head, if I don't shift my eyes, if I just look at the one point in life, I see that point with clarity. So at the moment, I'm seeing myself in the screen on the laptop. But apart from the laptop, I can see the wall, the room. There's a window in front of me with light coming in that's a little bit glary, neighbor's fence and stuff. But I can see that, but it's I can see it in decreasing clarity and as it moves further away. And so if when we draw, we replicate that life, that reality effect by having our marks become less clear, more gestural, a little bit of ambiguity into what we're looking at, less clarity than the center of the focus. That's mimicking the effect that we get in life. And that's why that injects a sense of realism, because it's echoing what happens just mechanically with our eyes and our brains, our perception when we draw. So, yeah. I have a broken arm in a cast. I can still draw. I don't know if you were on German when I sliced a couple of fingers. So, but fortunately, it's my non-drawing writing hand. So this has just got me out of some jobs outside that I needed to do, because this one's quite a nasty kind of, yeah. You know that awful moment when you know you've cut yourself, but you haven't looked to see how badly, and you don't want to. Yeah. A rapidograph seems to be known more as rotring. Oh, yes, yes, yes. Yeah. When I was at school, I had a friend. Oh, so this is in like 10 BC. I had a friend whose father was actually a very well-known and famous architect in Sydney, and so she had them because he would use them, and they were very much the architects. Yep. I did tech drawing at school too, and yeah, I almost did architecture, but I did teaching instead. Thanks, Brazen. And look, I've had 5 likes since I brazenly asked for likes. So there you go. Kathy Wagner, I'm mentoring a young guy who loves to draw. He has a unique style, very natural, interesting. Do you have any suggestions on how I can help him maintain his style? My own style is traditional. Yeah. Talk to him ask him about what he has in his head. Rather than making comments about the ink on the paper, try and help him understand what he's trying to do and actually develop a more sophisticated way of understanding his desires for his art, what he wants at the end in a big picture sense, because that then sets him up to find the marks that he needs to bring that into being. And our thoughts are kind of tricky things, because we can have them all the time and we can think about something for a long time, but always in kind of a vague, sort of fairly slushy way, because we just haven't had the requirement to crystallize them into a sharper view, which means we never get to see them more clearly, more sharply. And as I've said a few times, it's been a huge benefit for me personally making these videos, because it's forced me to actually put my slushy, what am I doing when I draw thoughts? What am I trying to do and how should I do it? By forcing me to put them into words, I've developed such clarity in understanding what I'm trying to do, and therefore work out how am I going to get there, and then to be able to critique myself well on how to get there, because I've got a sharper idea of where I'm trying to go and my method of getting there. And it's been a really compounding thing. I mean, I'm a bit shy of saying, in the because I've only really been drawing a few years. I started my street sketching in 2018, which was what, 6 years ago. It's less than 6 years. It was July 2018. And I've only been doing my ink drawing for maybe 3 years, the freehand ink drawing. And I'm surprised at how quickly I can see development in what I'm doing. And I actually think a huge part of it is because of making these videos. It's made me work out what I'm doing. It's not that my process is superior to anyone else's, but it's simply that I've been I forced myself for a different purpose, making videos, to actually understand what I'm trying to do more sharply, more clearly. And yeah. So I think if you can help him to do that, and just to show interest in from his perception, to show interest in what he's trying to do, I think will generate enthusiasm. Because if you're mentoring him, it's quite possible he doesn't have anyone else to speak into himself about his art. And it's quite possibly a really important part of him that's maybe not appreciated by other adults in his life. So it's a wonderful place to be in, Kathy, and it's a great question. And does that sound helpful? Do you feel that there's something from that you can actually now see yourself doing? It's really giving him opportunity to talk about what he wants to do, but with your purpose being to help him to see more clearly, and therefore start to see new possibilities as well, with the clarity that he has with his starting point. Because whatever he's thinking at this point is just his starting point for where he could possibly go, as it is for all of us. As I just said before, as I've become to understand my drawing process, I'm now starting to see the possibilities of, well, gosh, when I start to when I go back to oil painting, hmm, how I've my thoughts and thinking for drawing now start to inform my painting in ways that weren't possible. Not so much because I've learned new techniques. I haven't learned any new techniques that I can use in oil painting that I didn't have, but it's my new way of thinking, of understanding the putting something onto something to translate something, that I can bring that understanding to my painting now. It's I keep saying it's not learning how to crosshatch. It's not learning how to draw a straight line, though that's a handy thing to know. Um, but it's understanding my understanding, your understanding for you of the drawing process. And that's why I think my blah, blah, blah talk to camera videos are far more valuable in the long run than the drawing demo ones, where, okay, you can copy my drawing of a tree, but you have to understand my thinking of where those marks come from to have that, to end up developing your own way of understanding how to draw a tree. And then you can draw any tree at any distance. Does that make sense? Never suggested he goes to an art school. Well, I have never been to an art school, so I guess yeah, I did do a introduction to drawing course, which was like a 3 hour a week on a Wednesday night, it was TAFE. I don't know if that's like a community college in the States, but it was great. Like every week we did something different, or maybe we might do something for 2 weeks in a row. But we'd do with ink, we'd do pencil, we'd do with charcoal, we'd do with those compressed color things, we'd do with chalky pastel, we'd do with washes, and then we'd do live drawing. We'd have models, or we'd go and draw buildings. We'd go and draw trees. We'd draw each other. We'd do portraits of ourselves, of other people. Like every week it was something different. And the idea, because it was introductory, was that every week we just do something very different, both in what we used, and so it was actually a wonderful exposure to the possibilities of drawing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But except for that, I've had to work it out myself. But I said I had that advantage of having learned how we learn when I did my teaching. But yeah, and look, I'm sure there are good drawing schools and not so helpful ones, and it partly depends what I want to do with the skills I'm developing, whether the skills I develop in that institution end up being helpful. But let's move on. A rapidograph is a technical pen, especially used by engineering. Makes sense. Yes. Actually, that was the point I was just thinking, Brazen. So thank you. You've said it probably better than I would have. But with that sort of pen, it's designed for an even line, and so that's why architects used it, because, and still do, I'm sure. I probably don't use any pens, because it gives an even line consistently. But in drawing, I like the energy that varying my line width gives me. So therefore, in my mind, for my drawing, it's not going to be a helpful thing to use, even though we all coveted this girl in having it because it was such a snazzy pen in the 70s. What do I... just telling the fundamentals where you think he lacks, and then he'll discover the rest. So yeah, no, I think drawing him out, helping him to understand what he's trying to do, where he wants to go, and then that will also, if you do have any input that you can give him in terms of kind of technique or ways to explore where he wants to go productively, then you can line those up with where he's wanting to go. It's a bad art teacher who tries to have everyone's drawings look like their drawings. A good art teacher will help you to draw the best you can for the way that you want to draw, and will make it feel simple along the way. I do get frustrated at times when I catch the odd snip of this or that, and I think, you could say that so much more easily, although people say I go on too much. Sonic Sands. Oh no, hang on, I missed one. They keep sliding up. Kathy, absolutely not. He's a security guard at the complex where I live, so I don't think he'd be able to afford it. Oh, of course, yeah. What do you? Oh, so he's not a boy, but it doesn't matter. He may well be a boy in terms of, as in young, in terms of drawing. So, help him to understand what he's wanting to achieve. What do I suggest for a middle school student to learn, prepare for architecture? Well, the thing is, you don't, my understanding, I had a great conversation with the daughter of a friend who a few years ago graduated from architecture, and she'd just done her first couple of years working for a prestigious architecture firm in Sydney. And of course, you don't need to be able to draw anymore to do architecture, unlike when I left school and you had to have done tech drawing and stuff, because the programs do it all. And I guess AI, Siri, design the building for me, please, 13 stories, whatever. But this friend said that certainly in Sydney, in Australia, there is this swing back, as so often happens, to the hand drawing skills for architects. And it's not that it's necessary for architecture, for the architects to have these hand drawing skills, but it's seen as prestigious. And in that sense, it's advantageous to have them, to develop them, because to be able to produce drawings for clients that don't have that kind of sterile kind of computer program look is seen as being helpful. And also, with a client, you can kind of show things quickly on a bit of paper. So it's certainly a good thing to do. I suggest that you start to draw buildings. Start to draw the sort of architecture that you like. That it doesn't necessarily have to be the sort of architecture that you'd be designing as an architect, because you might like things that just aren't built anymore, like, I don't know, the Lincoln Memorial or something. But and that will give you a context then for starting to make sure you understand things such as perspective or more. I mean, perspective obviously is important for architecture. One of the big problems for artists is that most of the understanding perspective videos, I think, are relics of videos or presentations, that teaching presentations that were designed to teach architects, where, that box on the flat plane, well, that's great if you want to showcase a building, one building, without the distraction of context, and context includes terrain, and yet we see these, especially those 2-point perspective videos, and we look at it, we see it, we understand it, and we think we understand it. But then when we go to draw, we can't apply it. And we end up thinking there's something wrong with my head. I must be just not able to understand. Perspective must be too hard. When in fact, the problem is that the video we watched was actually designed to teach architects what they needed to understand for perspective, and that it doesn't quite look that way when the ground goes up and down, or when the buildings are on streets that curve around or that cross not at right angles. There are still perspective rules, and they kind of relate back to the ones we've got, but it's different. And so, because we haven't been told what we haven't been told, we think we're to blame, that we're not capable. It's just that we haven't been given enough information. And not that all that information can be given in one video, but we need to be told that there's more, that we haven't been given it. So, but equally, I keep saying, for artists, if I'm not drawing from my imagination, I don't need to understand anything about perspective. I just need to be able to see the angles and to draw those angles at that angle. I don't need to understand foreshortening. I just need to be able to look at a building and see a wall that's sloping away from me and think, well, gosh, that doorway that's in the center of the wall is actually 2/3 of the way down across the width of that building on my paper because of the effect of foreshortening. So all of that, or all of those things, yeah, just start to draw and see where the problems are. And if you're in middle school, I don't know whether you're doing art. There's a good chance. I mean, I was doing art and tech drawing because I thought I'd become an architect at that point when I chose those subjects. But ask an art teacher at your school, can you just tell me any problems here? You've got access to a teacher, and I would think that even if you weren't a student, that any art teacher in middle school would be delighted to have any student show interest in art and to be asking their advice. So yeah, I hope that's helpful, Sonic. Michael, I like how my style manifests in fine line more than charcoal, but I struggle with using purposeful cross hatching to make the shadows look descriptive of the surface. The lines look messy. I assume you're talking about fine liner rather than charcoal with your cross hatching. Then go back to simpler subjects. Go back to simpler surface textures, simpler surfaces. Work at creating the effect you want, and look at the work of other artists who you think in their cross hatching they do capture what you would like to be capturing. So find artists who do line drawings of similar subjects to the ones that you want to do. And I'm not saying copy them. I'm saying look at what they've done and understand the marks that they've put, that they've layered, that they've whatever, and see the effect that they've created. And I mean, like, you might actually copy their marks as a way of really intensely, just on a bit of paper, I mean, to really intensely concentrate to see what they've done, how they've done it, and to see what it feels like for you to put marks on the paper to create that same effect. And then but find that for a range of artists, and look to see what the options are. And I'm not saying use any one, but you may find that you combine a few of them together in a way that to find the marks that then flow naturally out of yourself. There's nothing, no one's going to invent at this point in human history, with all the people who've picked up a pen and done crosshatching, no one's going to invent a new mark to put on the paper that's never been put on the paper before. No one's even going to think of a different way of combining different marks to create a new way of cross-hatching. So it's always a case of looking at what's been done before, what can be. There's nothing wrong with that. And using that to help me stimulate my own understanding of the hatching process for the hatching result I want. So you want your shadows to look more descriptive of the subject surface. So are you talking like shadows on the grass? Because I actually have a video on drawing shadows on grass. that might be the sort of thing that you're after. And so something such as that one video, although it's only one subject, it, it, it might unlock a broader application of the principles that I use in that. So, yeah, yeah. What do you think? Good grief. I've been at this for 2 hours. Blimey. Andre. Oh dear, there's more questions. They're sliding down. Oh dear, better hurry up. Andre, funny thing, I was struggling to decide what to listen to while I do my daily pose gestures during exercise and found you were live. Oh, right. But okay, well, wonderful. So you're drawing at the moment and you do figure drawing. Good on you. Not easy. And it's not that it's intrinsically harder than I think other subjects. The problem is we observe other people for obvious reasons more intently than we observe other things, other subjects. So if something's not quite right in a portrait or a figure drawing, we can tell. We may not even know what it is that's not quite right, but we can tell it's not quite right because from our earliest memories in the cradle, we look carefully at people because we depend on people and we engage with people more than we engage with any other thing when we're young. And so we develop this, what becomes intuitive knowledge of how figures should look. And if we see a drawing and it doesn't look like that we can see it, that there's something wrong with it. So yeah, that's kind of funny, isn't it? Yeah. So it's not that figures are intrinsically harder to draw, the same principles to draw anything, but we have higher standards because we understand, we look more at figures. So yeah, good on you. Yeoman, Michael, have you tried out other types of textures than cross hatching to see if it gets the effect? Yeah. Yep. And there is hatching, of course, as well. I like to think of, rather than lines and hatching and cross hatching, I just keep thinking of marks, and all of these things are marks. And in my mind, it keeps my mind open. So there's, people talk about stippling, little dots and things. Yeah, dots are great too. And sometimes it's not the marks, but it's the not putting of marks. So I often do lines where I do like a dot, a dash, a longer dash, 2 dots, a longer, like a row of assorted marks with a very slight gap between all of them. And that creates an effect, a visual effect that may be at the base of a wall that has grass, mown grass coming up to it, seen from a distance. So we're not actually seeing blades of grass, but we do get the sense of visually, this is not a straight line that we look at. I'm trying to capture the effect with my marks of what I'm seeing. I can't draw the blades of grass up against the building at this distance, even if I had all the time in the world. So I am trying to create the fact that there's this visual distortion of this line where the building hits the ground. And that's what I talk about and I find thinking of marks, and some of what I do may be a tiny vertical line, like a tiny vertical line, just to give a hint of that sense of the verticality of the grass. And this is what I mean when I talk about trying to draw the effect, not the detail of what we see. Oh, I've got excited. I'm sitting forward. Drawing the effect of what I see, not the detail. And using marks, I find the most helpful way of thinking for myself, because it opens up every possibility of ink on the paper. Neighbor just shut their door if you heard that. Their back door is kind of at the side here. Okay, hope that answered your question. Thanks, Kathy. Yep. Stippling. You're ahead of me again, Brazen. Joman, how much details do you think we need to add our training exercises? When I draw something, I start with a box and then stop there, not to get hard on doing it. Is that No, just drawing the boxes, not too many details. Look, again, it depends on our purpose, um, and the subjects we like to draw, and how easily they can be broken down. And am I trying to do a drawing? Am I really doing an exercise, like almost like a series of just straight lines on a sheet of paper to practice doing straight lines and moving my whole arm or something? So it depends what I want to have. I mean, I've just ducked off camera to try and find a drawing. Okay, here are three of them. Oh, there's four of them even. So last week, I think it was, I did a series of videos that were just quick, like 15-minute drawings of just details. So these are details of architecture. And I really like doing these. I like looking at these sorts of details on buildings and drawing them. But as a drawing, I mean, it's a drawing, it's a thing. This is a bay window, but it's actually exercise. It's an exercise practicing quite specific things. And I wouldn't even draw all these lines if I was further back from the subject than in this zoomed in shot. But this is something I can do in 15 minutes, and I can practice perspective. I can practice creating the sense of depth. I can practice hatching if I want, and like, working out the direction of hatching lines, what's helpful, what creates the effect I want, what works best, or what doesn't work so well. I could practice just like what to do with the windows with behind the glass, and so there, and I had fun with this one. I enjoyed this one. I like this sort of, in Australia, we call this Victorian architecture because Queen Victoria was on the throne of England and at the time. And it lets me practice lots of things, but proportions, um, circles, semicircles, getting things symmetrical, practicing letters, and so forth, and alignment. Even though there's no perspective so much on this, we're looking straight on. It's just a little bit looking up under the arches because this was high up on the building. But yeah, so all of, but it's still like a 20-minute drawing. But it's a little more satisfying than just drawing straight lines or boxes, because there is something that still looks like something at the end. But I've been able to focus on particular skills in doing that. So I find that helpful. But I also did a video this week. Gosh, where's this bit of paper? Here it is. Here it is. Well, last week, no, this week. In the last week. It's Monday, isn't it? Yeah. Well, it is for me. It's probably still Sunday for some of you. So I did this now. This was a video on extreme perspective. So we're about 1.5 bricks up off the ground. But it really was doing a simplified version, stripping it down to the bare bones of the object to really just focus on the perspective angles. And that included the perspective, but that included the foreshortening as well of the windows and the doors. So the door's actually in the center of that wall, but it's further to the right, and just getting the proportions and the placement, but the distance between that first column and the last column, the left and the right-hand column, and all that. So it lets you just work on some things without the overhead of trying to like do the grass and indicate the big sandstone blocks or put hatching in for what's in shade or whatever. So I find, again, yes, we don't have to draw the whole thing. We can work out what we want to improve on and choose to do drawings or part drawings, but then when I did this one, I did this in the same week, I wanted to do something bigger. I wanted to do something that would take me more time, where I could explore hatching and lines. And, you can see with this, I've basically drawn this more via hatching than I have with anything else. There are very few lines. I don't know whether there'd be any line here that's sort of longer than 2 centimeters. and only a few of those, there wouldn't be many lines there that are longer than a centimeter or 3/4 of a centimeter. What's that? 7.5 millimeters. So this has really created a scene through marks that are put on the paper in certain ways. So that was what I was wanting to explore. And it's not the only way to draw a complex bush scene like that, but it's the one that I enjoy doing that creates the effect I want. But I'll probably start to do some more now. I was just thinking the other day where I pull back from the intensity of so many marks, and actually try and simplify more the marks I make. So, we swing one way, we swing another way, we explore, we have fun, and then we work out, and then we have more options when I started drawing. It's not how do I draw this, but it's how will I draw this time from the different ways I could draw it. And that's where our creativity really starts to bounce around very satisfyingly in different directions, and also according to the time we have. So I may make that decision of whether I have 15 minutes to capture this bush scene or whether I have 2 hours, which is no, it took me an hour and a half. But yeah, depending on the time we have. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, thanks, German, for that. Yeah, I suppose I'll try to draw. This is was it? Uh, oh gosh, hang on. It's just all. Oh gosh, how far? Oh gosh, there's lots more questions than I thought. Yeah, yeah. I suppose I'll try to draw other textures and use cross-hatching as a catch-all for shading text. I struggle to cross-hatch in a way that works with the subject instead of yep. And so that's great. Look, you are halfway there, Michael, to the answer because you understand the problem. And one of the if you look at that video I posted last week on 10 ways to use cross-hatching, one of the ways is to introduce clarity into our subject. And so, the easiest way to show you is here. If you look at the trees here, you'll see that when I've got foliage, generally, like there's a predominantly vertical direction in my marks. Yeah, but more vertical than horizontal. When I do trees, not always, but I often, I mostly do my hatching horizontally for the tree, which takes more time, but sometimes great art does. No, but I do it that way for two reasons. One is I can often indicate the form, the three-dimensionality, that this is fundamentally a cylinder. And where eye level is, if these are straight, where eye level is, that would make a straight line appropriate. But as we go below eye level, we start to slightly curve more and more one way. And as we go above eye level, we start to now, but if the tree slightly moves towards us and then slightly moves away from us as it grows, then that's going to change. That's going to affect that. But generally, I'm doing horizontal lines for those two reasons. But just see how much clearer those trees are, how much easier it is to distinguish those trees from the foliage further back, not just because I've allowed a little bit of a white halo, but because of the direction of the line. So this is why when we understand the options that hatching in different ways and different sort of marks can give us, we can start to make, and once we're trying to work out what our purpose is, we can start to, oh, that's the bit that you were talking about, Herman. Yeah. So I'm just, Herman had said in a comment for this, yes, when you watch the video of me drawing this, that I think I actually did the backgrounds before I hatched this, and how it did, the contrast of these trees and that background did dim, became less. Yeah, and I was thinking that too when I drew them. But then this is at the edge, and it's not meant to be an immediate attention grab. And I still want this journey up the steps to be the main part of this. So, and again, if you haven't hit the like button for this video and you're hanging around for a few minutes, please do hit it, and consider going back and listening to my goodness, 2 hours that you've missed. Um, okay. Brazen. I did art for a year in community college. I enjoyed it, but would only return if I can just sit in or audit courses for no grade whatsoever now. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, sometimes we need the grade because we're getting a qualification or a sheet of paper that says something that will mean something to someone, that will have some advantage for us. But it's great when we can just do it and enjoy and explore. But I think we all still want to improve. And so, yeah, yeah. Stippling sounds like a great idea. Thanks. Yeah, are you a patient man, Michael? Of course, stippling sounds to me like a lot of hard work. Um, yeah, yeah. Anyway, yeah, good on you. I mean, it can be beautifully done to beautiful effect. Um, I just don't think I have the patience to do it as a major thing. Like I do like to splash dots around because they can have a wondering effect of sort of like dissipating a lot of ink into little ink or no ink. And yeah, so they're a wonderful transition thing, I find, in terms of value. Um, please bring more videos on do's and don'ts of self-taught artists. Um, I'll call you Roy if I can. Roy, I have a whole playlist on tips for the self-taught artists. There's about 90 videos, I think, on it. And yeah, yeah. And it's all the sort of big picture stuff that I'm talking about now, not so much showing a drawing, but talking about understanding and pitfalls and explaining things like how to critique our own drawing. My understanding of the drawing process appears in many of them, not because it's the only way, but because if you come to understand my way, that may give you a starting point or a template for you to work out your way, for you to work out, oh, yeah, yeah, okay, I understand that, but I'm trying to do this. So maybe that means, whatever, X, Y, Z. But at least to understand the fact that having an understanding of the drawing process is a huge advantage in our getting to where we want to go. Not to your drawings looking like mine. That would be a sign that I was a bad teacher. You might wish your drawings looked like mine. I don't know. But from as a teacher point of view, rather than an artist, that's not a sign of good teaching, because a sign of good teaching is that I help you to draw the best you can, the way you want to draw for the purposes that you have. And that's always the sign of a good teacher, but a good art teacher. And so if you have an artist, if you have a teacher or a tutor or something, and all the time they're just pushing you to make your drawings look like theirs, they're probably not the best one for you. No matter how good their drawings look, unless your aim is to draw the same as them. But I think most of us should aim higher than drawing the same as anyone else, because we all have our own creativity within us. And that's what we want to really, I think, develop, because then we, in some way, bring something different and unique to what we do. Why do I want to be a copy of someone else, no matter how successful they are? Okay, where are we up to? Do draw, do not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's partly true, German, but we can draw unhelpfully over and over and over and over again. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you'd agree that practice doesn't necessarily bring improvement. Informed and intentional and guided, and that can be self-guided practice will. When the kids were young and we'll have paying fortune for piano lessons for them, my son was dutiful, but didn't really want to do it with it. And he'd always do his practice. He'd get up early, but he'd just play really fast to get it out of the way so he could run off and do what he wanted to do. And I in the end said, look, mate, you're going to get really good at playing the piano badly if you keep practicing like this, because you will not learn to play it with the right rhythm or tempo. I mean, I can't play it. I don't play it. So, I mean, I couldn't, but just in general terms, because you're not learning to play the right tempo, the right pace, because you're rehearse, you practice, you rush it all the time. Even if you hit the right keys, you're not getting the feel of it. And we do get better at what we do all the time. So we want to make sure that what we're doing when we practice is actually what we want to achieve at the end, or else we'll simply reinforce the bad habits. And that will happen with drawing just as much as with hurried piano practice. Brazen at Sonic, after all my kids are grown, what I suggest is looking at colleges that are really renowned for architecture and reach out to their admissions counselors and get their advice yearly too. Yeah. And actually, that's a good point, Brazen. And I'm not sure whether this is what you're saying anyway, Brazen, but if you have any idea of where you might study architecture, find out what their drawing requirements are. Because if you're really confident that's something that you want to do, you can actually pitch your and whether a drawing an architectural drawing portfolio is part of the applications process, because you might like to start preparation for that now in middle school and let that direct your focus. As I said, I can't give you any particular advice about architecture. I haven't much to. I mean, people often think I'm an architect, but I'm not. But yeah, I don't think it's too far out to be thinking, where might I study this? What are my chances of getting in, both for the cost and for whatever competitive process there is, and how might I prepare for that? And what part does a portfolio of my drawings play in that? So, yeah. But good on you. I hope you make it. I mean, Stephen has herself to artist. Yeah. German was just being a bit tongue in cheek there, Roy. Yeah. So have a look at the find that playlist. Have a look at the videos titles and choose the ones that seem to connect. Now, there's a lot, and if you go right back to the beginning, a lot of what I say there is still true, and I wouldn't disagree with any of it. Some of it I may have developed a bit. Well, I know some of it I have developed a bit more, but it may even be better to have the simpler versions at once, so that there's less to have to juggle at the one time. And then if you sort of, with the parts that you're interested in, if you sort of progress through over time, sort of add complexity to those earlier ones. That may be a way to go. Yeah. Scott Robertson's How to Draw books, great deep dive into how perspective works. Yeah, thank you. Expelled Ducks, very good. That makes a sense, Stephen, that the perspectives are architects, because I always regard theories. Yeah, and I mean, that's my perception, but I think, I mean, how YouTube works, quite frankly, I think what happens is a lot of people want to make a video and they can see that videos on perspective get a lot of views, and on my channel, that's the case. If I do a video on perspective, it usually gets a higher number of views than other videos that I think are way more important, which is frustrating. And so I think, and it is kind of if you look at a video, someone else's video on, say, 2-point perspective, it's a very template thing. It's very easy to now make your own video that says exactly the same thing, has exactly the same illustration, and is just as unhelpful, and to post it as another how to do 2-point perspective video, reinforcing the idea now with another video that's just the same as the one that person copied to make this one, because it's an easy video to copy and to get lots of views yourself. And now people watching these videos think, whoa, they're all the same. Like, this is what it is. And probably there's every chance the person who's made one of these videos doesn't even draw, but they just saw this as a topic to kind of, that could be easily copied in a video format. And so they don't even know that their video lacks all this information or isn't useful for artists who I'm sure are 90% of the, like someone doing architecture is not going to be ironically looking at a YouTube video on perspective. They'll be doing perspective in their architecture course. So it's all a bit ironic and a bit hard going for artists to realize that, yeah, actually, no, these videos haven't been designed for artists. They're the tail end of a presentation that was for architects. And yeah, we don't actually even need to understand perspective to draw if we draw from life or from photos. So we just need to learn to observe. I can see you. So thanks for all that. Emphasis upon theory. Can I switch exercises, books to help me get better at figure drawing? Who was our figure drawer up here? Was that you, Michael? Were you doing the figure drawing? Can you recommend a book? Because I can't. Just because I haven't done it. I tell you what, though, I do on Instagram. I do follow, and this might be the first social media account I ever followed, or one of the first ones, one of the first half dozen. Oliver Sin, Sin. Does amazing drawings in charcoal, mostly portraits, but he does amazing figure drawings as well. I don't know whether he has any books or courses. But maybe if Michael can recommend something, you can put a comment in here. We're exhausted now. What else would I do? It was actually pouring with rain. I was going to not do any YouTube stuff today. I was going to go and garden. And then this massive thunderstorm hit us. We probably got 50 millimeters in an hour. And it's all drenched. I mean, sort of a bit of drizzly sun out now, but yeah. So I didn't want to watch TV all day, so I thought, I could just answer questions. Okay. Andrew Looms book. Yep, Andrew Looms. Fun with a pencil. Watch Force Drawing by Mike Matese. They have a YouTube channel and books. Thank you, Roy. Find it hard when I practice lower body. I kind of understand, but my drawings look quite illogical and weird. Quite possibly you're more experienced in looking at upper body. I mean, it can be as simple as this, because I mean, there's no logical reason why the lower body would be harder to draw than the upper body. I can understand the head might be a little more challenging to draw because there's more detail, more close together, and we're even more focused on looking at faces all our life. So something's not quite right, we can tell. But there's no reason why lower body would be harder, except that probably because the upper body is closer to the head and hands are very expressive, that we actually spend more time just observing the upper body. So we can see things more easily when we understand what's happening there. But with the lower body, just need to maybe slow down a bit and to really work at the observation of the lower body. Where are we at? Bergman, thank you. Thanks for that, guys. Honestly, I think Loomis is similar to two-point perspective, more academic than helpful for my practice. Okay. Still whip by hands and noses, but otherwise I prefer dropline technique at this junction. Yep. Look, once we find something that's working for where we want to go, then that's a valuable resource for us. But if we're studying in a way and we feel like it's a square peg in a round hole, then we just need to either find the square peg or the round hole, whichever we need to go with where our thinking and aims are going. Okay, Loomis was directed to illustrators, but it's a great start. Hi there, Stevie. Also agree with you, Brazen. Yep. Health of proportion shapes helps you get. Only takes you so far. Yep. Roy, I think with all your Loomis are not complete. I mean, there is no clearness in writing. Okay. Yep. Little conversation there. Great. Huff, if you just started out, you should keep Loomis's knowledge in the back of your head, but I highly recommend force drawing. Your understanding of figure will be. I don't know what force drawing is, Roy. Maybe you can tell us in a comment so that. Okay. Yep. Tried stipple a single brick once. 1,000 dots in a brick. I mean, maybe that was overkill. Yep. The force approach looks difficult in first place, but if you spend some time in their ideas and keep patience, you'll find the enjoyment. Okay, I'll have to look that up. Just time consuming at the end of our lifetime is very valuable. We certainly have to make careful choices about how we use our days when we can see less of them on the calendar lined up in front of us. Yes, yep. If you want to, dude, crazy, welcome, dude. If you want to teach drawing to a child, say 6 years, how would you start to reach them? I would firstly encourage them not to look at other drawings that are being done for children. It's really well documented now that when children just learn to draw themselves, like a toddler at home, and it's just mum and they don't, and mum doesn't draw, they don't see any other drawings except what they produce. It's incredibly interesting and creative stuff. And what's interesting is that, yes, they start drawing a face and the eyes are almost always the first thing they do because that's what's important to them. Mum's eyes, dad's eyes. That's what they look at. That's their world. They don't see the rest. And then, they start to have heads on bodies with no necks because they don't notice the necks. And then they tend to have arms that have fingers coming out of the end of the arms because they become aware of the fingers, not so much the arms, not the hands. Often don't do ears because that's not so important. And then as they start to see things, these things start to get included in really often very sort of realistic ways. But what happens is they get to school and they start to see children's books where it's very cartoon-like, and cartoons are often symbols, simplified ways of drawing things, and so they end up thinking, oh, I see, that's how you do an eye. It's a circle with a circle in it. Oh, that's how you do a nose. It's a triangle. Oh, that's how you do ears. Oh, that's how you do hair. Oh, that's how you do a house. That's how you do a tree. It's a stick with a circle. And suddenly they start to draw things by using these symbols, these stereotyped, hyper simplified kind of things that may or may not have any similarity to the actual subject, but we all understand that this means that. And then that becomes how they draw. And they lose all that translation of life into marks that was so wonderfully. So I would say, with a 6-year-old, they've already been at school, I would encourage them to try and use marks that capture a sense of realism, at whatever level of observation they've got, but make it fun. It needs to be fun. At 6, you're not correcting them. You're not critiquing their drawing. But what you can do is things that you think are in a helpful creative direction rather than a stereotyping sort of backwards creativity direction, really respond well to that and encourage them. Oh, look, I love the way you've done this. I love the way these leaves are, it looks great. Wow, fantastic. Let's do more trees or whatever. But try and avoid them sort of using symbols, little, things they've seen in comics and cartoons or other people's drawings. And don't have them watch those videos where little cutesy ice cream cones with faces are drawn. Because it gets you thinking about drawing in, I think, an unhelpful way. If that's not where you want your drawing to end up, if you want them to be able to start to think about translating the real world into marks on paper to create something that comes from them, then you don't want them getting into a habit of drawing hyper-simplified cartoon symbols to represent real things. You want them to start to struggle with that process that they can become more sophisticated with. Okay, I'm going to have to end soon, guys. I need to go for a walk. So I'll just quickly Oh, Force Join is the channel name. Great. Thanks, Mayu. Thank you very much. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. It's raining. I can just answer questions, he says. Flex his fingers like a pen. We've got this covered, Stephen. SpongeBob transition screen shows a French voiceover, says 12 hour. No, look, it's 5 o'clock here now. It was mid-afternoon when I started. Do crazy reinforcement training with electric chocks. I don't get that. Okay, look, that's great. Thanks, everyone. I'm gonna sign off before I pass out and have a drink and pump some blood and do some drawing. Please hit the like button if you haven't. Check out my self-taught artist playlist, tips for the self-taught artist. If you haven't looked at that, or just check out my playlist as a way of navigating through the embarrassingly large number of videos I've posted now to find the parts of that catalog that are going to be most helpful for where you're wanting to work on right now. But whatever you do, whatever you watch, whatever you draw, however you do it, you know what I'm going to say. Have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.